Daniel Ruffin of The Last Temptation met his demise on June 1st, 1991. Official reports state an accidental overdose. However, there seems to be a disturbing truth that must be revealed, and a surviving member has done justice to that. What could this be? Were the reports fabricated? Let's find out. Who is David Ruffin? The late singer was born Davis Eli Ruffin on January 18, 1941, in Wynot, Mississippi. Despite his upbringing, he chose to stand out and make a name for himself. This led to him being one of America's iconic voices. David was known for his unique, raspy, and anguished tenor vocals. And in 2008 and 2023, he was ranked as one of the 100 greatest singers of all time by Rolling Stone magazine. In 1989, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for his work with the Temptations.
Well, I grew up listening to spiritual. Those are my brother Jimmy and Rita Mae.
From an early age, David developed an interest in music, and thankfully, his father encouraged musical expression through gospel music. He grew up listening to spiritual music, so it wasn't hard for him to join his family. This led his family to perform as a gospel group. David, alongside his other siblings, would travel with their father and stepmother as a family gospel group. They opened shows for Mahalia Jackson, the Five Blind Boys of Mississippi, and others.
Just opened up shows for like the Soul Stirrers, Mahalia Jackson, Clara Ward singers.
David would sing in the choir at Mount Salem Methodist Church, talent shows, and anywhere he was given the opportunity. David later left home at the age of 14 under the guardianship of Minister Eddie Bush and went to Memphis, Tennessee with the aim of pursuing the ministry. However, he became drawn to secular music instead. During this time, he took on the stage name Little David Bush, using the last name of his guardian, and began performing at talent shows across the region.
A group called the Dixie Nightingales out of Memphis, Tennessee, singing spiritual, and we was on at that time.
David's music journey took him to many places, including Hot Springs, Arkansas, where he performed with the jazz musician Phineas Newborn Sr. The singer made sure to learn and improve on his craft with every job he took, which helped him boost his career. At the age of 16, David was already a member of different gospel groups, which included the Dixie Nightingales and the Soul Stirrers, of which he was briefly a member. He joined the group after Johnny Taylor departed. Every experience he has was like a stepping stone to building his career and skills as a vocalist and performer. Soonest, David became inspired by secular artists like Sam Cooke and Jackie Wilson. These people left gospel singing to become secular artists. He got attracted to the kind of music they sang and had the urge to venture into it. This point became a turning point in his career as he began tilting from gospel to soul music. David Ruffin's journey to the Temptations. Later in the late 1950s, David moved to Detroit, where he got the perfect opportunity to actualize his dream of transitioning to secular music, away from the gospel music he was raised with. Detroit was a city full of life and enough musical opportunities, especially with the establishment of Motown Records. David's brother Jimmy was already in the music industry and working for Ford Motor Company. This just made things easier for David, as he was provided with the opportunity he needed to pursue his career. Soon, David recorded his first single, which featured You and I and Believe Me. Unfortunately, he was not successful. Fast forward to 1963, David had his breakthrough when he auditioned for The Temptation. Thanks to his talent, he was able to impress the audience during an audition for Motown staff at a New Year's Eve party. After that, he was officially invited to join The Temptations as a tenor vocalist in January 1964, after the founding member Elbridge Al Bryant was fired from the group. The interesting thing here is that David and his brother Jimmy auditioned to join the group, but only David was chosen. This just goes to show how talented and promising the singer was. When David joined The Temptations, he contributed background vocals and shared lead responsibilities with Eddie Kendricks and Paul Williams. David had his first recording session with the group on January 9, 1964. This confirmed his status as one of them. While he was allowed to be the lead singer for some tracks during live performances, many of his recordings were not released and were held back for over a year, as producers wanted to develop his sound. It wasn't so long until David's potential was recognized as a sleeping giant by Smokey Robinson, and Smokey thought if he could write a song that suited David's kind of voice, it would be a hit. While Smokey kept trying to actualize his plan, David kept improving and working on himself. Soonest, David became a very important asset to the Temptations, as his tenor was so powerful and sweet. By 1964, Smokey was able to come up with something that led to David having his first major hit, My Girl, with the Temptations. It was recorded in November and released a month later. By 1995, the song became the group's first #1 single. It topped the charts and became a classic. This song showed David's strength and capacity to express emotions through his singing, and it also elevated his status to lead singer and frontman. After the release of the hit single, My Girl, there was the release of other singles that blew up the group and made it very famous, including the ones that were led by David, such as It's Growing, Since I Lost My Baby Ain't Too Proud to Beg, Beauty Is Only, Skin Deep, and many others. David was also made to share lead vocals on the 1967 single, You Are My Everything, which was a hit with Eddie Kendricks. The singer was very skilled in his crafts, and his performances were captivating. This made him a fan favorite. Otis Williams, a member of the group, had once said that David was a natural comedian and was also a hard-working singer when he first joined the group.
Please don't leave me, girl. Ain't you proud to be?
Aside from David's vocal contributions to the Temptations, he made other contributions, including masterminding their trademark four-headed microphone stand. It seemed rather uncomfortable having to crowd around one microphone, so this innovation made it easy for other members of the group to sing and do their dance without stress. This also allowed the lead singer to sing with a different microphone. David's coming to the crew seemed like an answer to prayers because he brought life to the group and blended well with everyone. You would think it stayed this way up until his death, but unfortunately, it did not. David Ruffin was a very handsome young man. He was tall and slim, always wore dark sunshades, and had an alluring personality. He had the ability to command his audience, and he also stood out in every performance they had. This made him so famous, successful, and popular. But this fame negatively influenced him, and it was the beginning of his downfall. His fame came with personal struggles. Since he became an important vessel to the group, his ego spiked, and so did his demands. David Ruffin began to see himself as the light and star of the group and began to make impossible demands. He believed he was the reason for the success of the Temptations. By the mid-1960s, reports stated that he began demanding that the group's name be changed from the Temptations to David Ruffin and the Temptations. This came after the Supremes had changed their name to Diana Ross and the Supremes in early 1967. David wanted to be the central point, and this led to disagreements and disputes between David and the group's de facto leader, Otis Williams. During this time, David began exhibiting absurd and weird characters that affected the group's performances and spoiled the relationships he had with his group members.
I guess you heard about the limousine with the glasses. And everyone else was riding the station wagon, so I guess...
To make matters worse, the singer began battling addictions. He got addicted to cocaine, and this led to him missing out on rehearsals and performances due to the effects of the hard drug. He would refuse to travel with his group members and instead travel in a custom limo with his then-girlfriend, Tammy Terrell. In an interview, David said he knew this act wasn't appropriate, but that his team members would have rolled with him. If they wanted to, this custom limo had the image of his trademark black-rimmed glasses painted on the door. David's nonchalant attitude towards the group called for concern, but the group and its leader tried to manage the situation by trying to call him to order. But all efforts were in vain as he grew worse. David struggled with fame and addiction, and this caused a decline in his profession, his vocal abilities, and his relationships with people in the music industry. The singer even went as far as demanding the Temptations' financial records. He began asking for an account of the group's money because he felt he had the right to, since he contributed greatly to the growth of the team. This move, which David made, caused issues between him and Gordy. The last straw that got him fired from the group was when he missed a very important performance. David missed a date that was scheduled to be held on June 22nd, 1968 in Cleveland, Ohio. David missed this appointment because he wanted to attend a performance that was to be done by his new girlfriend, Barbara Gail Martin, Dean Martin's daughter. David missed this concert and was not even remorseful about it.
You know, but I don't see how you could fire someone out of a group of that magnitude.
There was no reasonable explanation for his actions, and this angered the group. The group felt he had crossed the line, and on June 27, 1968, David Ruffin was officially fired from the Temptations, and he was replaced with Dennis Edwards, who was a former member of the Contours. Dennis Edwards was also a friend of David and the group at large before this happened. This was a sad event, considering the Temptations was a group that David had helped become visible and successful. But on the contrary, he caused its downfall. After David got fired and was replaced, Edwards felt uncomfortable considering the circumstance and their friendship. Still, David had personally encouraged Edwards to take his place, assuring him that all was well. However, David's actions proved otherwise because he began showing up to every one of the Temptations concerts, which had Edward present. One would think this was all, but David even did far worse and more humiliating things. David struggled to accept the reality that he was no longer a part of the team. So whenever the group was on stage and performing a David-era song like My Girl or Ain't Too Proud to Beg, David would immediately mount the stage, grab the microphone from Edward's hands, and begin singing. David stole the show in an embarrassing way and manner, but thankfully, fans were entertained. But it didn't rule out the fact that they were confused by the stunt David pulled.
Found some money and doors open up to you that once would never, and you're getting all kind of adulation. And
according to Edwards, the adoration and admiration that fans had for David, as well as David's pleas to the group, made the other 4 members of the group consider giving David a second chance, which they eventually did, but David blew it off himself. David was given a second chance at a return show with the group in Gaithersburg, Maryland, but he arrived late to the occasion. This act made the group arrive at the decision to keep Edwards and drop every consideration of rehiring David. Otis Williams, the group leader, had already maintained that David was permanently fired and he could never be considered for rehiring. In an interview, he mentioned that David's success got to him a little bit too much, and it began affecting his career. This was the beginning of David Ruffin's downfall. David Ruffin was also a solo artist for Motown Records and had a separate contract from that of the Temptations. So, in October 1968, David filed a suit against Motown Records with the aim of getting off the label and getting an account of his money. Well, Motown countersued as the record label wished to prevent him from leaving. Eventually, the case was settled with the settlement requirement that David would stay with Motown until his initial contract was over.
It was beautiful and so sweet, but now it's not.
When it was clear to David that he had to move on, he decided to revive his solo career. David's first solo single was a song that was originally for the Temptations, My Whole World Ended, The Moment You Left Me. David kept recording songs for Motown Records, but some of them were not released until much later. For example, the album David was recorded in 1970, 1971, but was held by Motown until its commercial release in 2004. David went on to record more albums with his brother, and in 1970, they recorded I Am My Brother's Keeper, which received minor hits. Others were also released, and it was beginning to seem like his solo career was going to thrive. But David was unable to manage his cocaine addiction. Just like what happened, During his time with the Temptations, his career as a performer and solo artist began to decline yet again. It also became more transparent to David that Motown could never give him the publicity, fame, or even support he got from being a member of the Temptations. He wasn't even close to being popular. Ruffin later left Motown in 1977 and began recording for Warner Brothers Records. Here, he released the albums So Soon We Change in 1979 and Gentleman Ruffin in 1980. David later went on to sign with RCA Records, where he formed a duo with Eddie Kendricks, a former group member from the Temptations. This was someone who had also left the group because of his own personal problems and struggles, which included his voice getting weak from his years of chain smoking.
But it took a lot of effort and a lot of there's a lot of feeling involved. You get.
Ruffin and Eddie Kendricks later rejoined the Temptations in 1982, and this was when the group wanted to record their album Reunion. In an interview, the duo spoke about this. David said he knew it was going to happen and that their coming back together was more than a reunion. However, they stated how the reunion made not just the fans happy, but themselves too. The group also wanted to go on tour to promote the album, which also had the R&B hit Standing on the Top. This was a hit that was recorded with Rick James. This reunion tour didn't last long, and that was because of the obvious David Ruffin's personal demons. Due to his drug addiction, he caused the group a loss of thousands of dollars because he repeatedly failed to show up for concerts. This made the group leader, Otis Williams, fire David from the group for the second and last time during Christmas of 1982. Not just David, but Kendricks was also dismissed from the Temptations group, and this was on the grounds of his poor singing.
They called us, and they wanted to do the Apollo Theater.
Later on, in the same year, luck smiled on them both as longtime fans of the Temptations by the name Hall & Oates decided to team up with David and Ruffin to make a performance at the reopening of the Apollo Theater in New York. This performance was a successful one, and it was later released as a live album and single. The success of the performance became a starting point for the four members as they went on to sing and release a medley of Temptations hits in July 1985 at Live Aid. They made other songs, and one of them reached number 20 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 12 on the Adult Contemporary chart, and number 40 on the R&B chart. This was the single that earned David Ruffin his first and only Grammy nomination. This was the song The Way You Do the Things You Do and My Girl. Seeing how successful the first album was, Oates decided to write another small hit single for David and Kendrick. But again, David's addiction struggles came into play. The collaboration between David, Kendrick, and the team fell apart. This was also because Hall allegedly couldn't stand David's abuse of drugs and objected strongly against it.
When I first heard the Temptations sing, I knew right then and there was a sound.
Fast forward to 1989. David Ruffin was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the Temptations. Thereafter, David, Kendrick, and Dennis Edwards decided to collaborate, and they began touring and recording under the name Ruffin, Kendrick, Edwards, former leads of the Temptations. It was alleged that they chose the name because they wanted the publicity that came with the name The Temptations. They also wanted to prove an obvious point. By 1991, the trio had recorded a successful England tour that grossed an estimate of almost $300,000. Seeing that this was successful, they began planning a European tour. Unfortunately, David Ruffin wasn't able to witness this happen as he died on June 1st, 1991. It was reported that the cause of his death was an accidental overdose of crack cocaine, which many have doubted. It was reported that David was in Philadelphia on the evening of May 31st, 1991, after a successful England tour with his team members. That night, David got into a limousine, which he had borrowed, and was driven by a friend who was identified as Donald Brown. It was reported that they drove to a crack house on 52nd Street near Columbia Avenue, where David split 10 vials of crack cocaine with another man identified as William Nowell.
We'll be looking for a new love. You're not to blame.
It was later reported by witnesses that David was in good spirits when he arrived, up until when he took the drugs. Unfortunately, moments after ingesting the cocaine, he collapsed. It was reported that Brown drove him to the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, and he got there a few minutes before 3 a.m. on June 1st. Upon getting to the hospital, all efforts were made to revive him, but he gave up the ghost and was pronounced dead at 3:55 a.m. from an adverse reaction to the drug he ingested, which was cocaine. However, this didn't go well with family members, as they believed there was more to the story. Some speculated that the singer must have been robbed or attacked that day, considering the success of his England tour and the amount of money that it generated. David's family and friends believed that his death wasn't accidental, but well planned and executed. They claimed David had a money belt that contained an estimated $40,000 missing from his body. Diane Showers, who happened to be David's girlfriend at the time, had said she wasn't surprised when she learned of his death because he had a lot of money and could do whatever he wanted to do. However, regarding the missing money case, when the authorities found and searched him, it was reported that he had only $53 on him.
Right, and he was so excited. My daddy had, I think it was over $50,000 in a money belt.
Based on the suspected foul play, one of David's daughters, Cheryl Ruffin Robinson, aired her view and concern that it was highly possible for her father to have been set up or robbed during his final few hours on Earth. In an interview, she said her father had called her and told her how he had been free from drugs just 4 hours before he was pronounced dead. She said David also told her of how he was going to get her the car he had always promised her. She mentioned that her father had always carried a money belt and that he had over $50,000 in the belt. David was just 50 years old when he died. Witnesses also reported that David's body had signs of trauma as it had scratches. It was also said that his clothes were bloody. Members of David's family also believed that prior to his death, David had been clean for a while, and it made them wonder what he was doing at a crack house. If only the dead could speak for itself, then there wouldn't have been so many questions. While all these speculations were going on and mysteries were trying to be solved, David's body lay in the morgue, absolutely lifeless. In the Temptations television miniseries, it was shown that David's body was indeed beaten, and this portrayed David's body as being dumped in the street, which was in front of the hospital where he later dies. The miniseries also revealed that David's body stayed in the morgue for a week after his death without being claimed. This led to David's estate filing a lawsuit against those who were involved in the making of the series, suing them for defamation. David's estate claimed that he was actually taken to the hospital in a limousine and was even escorted to the waiting area by his driver, who hurriedly informed the hospital attendants of his identity so they could begin treatments immediately on him. However, David's estate lost the lawsuit when David's children came forward to state that the body of their father was not immediately claimed until a few days after his death by one of them.
Buttholes everywhere.
Yeah, I see exactly.
It's annoying because they not putting any respect on it.
Gotcha.
This miniseries had so much to say about David, and his son, David Eli Ruffin Jr., had a lot to say about the series. He expressed his displeasure with the movie, stating that it focused on crucifying his father and glorifying his negative sides. He further stated that it took years for not just him, but his mother to watch the movie.
With my girl, my girl, it's all I can.
This was the end of the singer David Ruffin. He was 50 years old when he died. His funeral was held at the New Bethel Baptist Church in Detroit. During his burial preparations, the late singer Michael Jackson volunteered to pay for the funeral expenses. However, he did not show up at the burial service. Other people handled some other costs. The floral arrangements were sent by Jackson, Rod Stewart, Daryl Hall, John Oates, Diana Ross, the Spinners, and Martha Reeves and the Vandellas. The surviving members of David's former group, The Temptations sang David's hit song My Girl at the funeral service. Other singers like Stevie Wonder and Aretha Franklin also rendered a song at the funeral. After everything, David was buried in Section 3 at the Woodlawn Cemetery in Detroit. The show of support and love during David's funeral somewhat contradicted what reports had to say about his death. David's family was not happy with what the media had to say about the cause of his death. They believed that the public was huge on his drug addiction and forgot about his contributions to music and the public at large. His daughter Cheryl made this revelation, stating how disappointed she was about the news surrounding her father's death. She was of the view that the public only had things to say about his flaws and not his positive side of him, which she felt was bad. The public had a lot to say on this case, and even to date, some fans have been in support, saying David died an unjust death, while others were of the view that he brought it upon himself, considering his involvement in drugs. On the other hand, the public had a greater advantage in D. David's case because there was too much evidence about the rough lifestyle he lived when he was alive. When it came to his drug addictions, he first sought help in 1967, but he couldn't get help. This caused him to have many legal cases. In 1978, David got arrested at a birthday party in Memphis on the grounds of disorderly conduct. He was said to have refused several requests to vacate the area after he had allegedly made threats against police officers and their families while being transported to jail. However, David denied this allegation and was later released.
Who knows where?
Sometime in 1982, David failed to pay taxes that amounted to over $310,000 for more than 2 years. And because of this, he was charged $5,000 and sentenced to 6 months in a low-security prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. He was there for only 4 months as he was released early for good behavior. In May 1986, David pleaded a no contest to a charge of receiving and concealing stolen properties that were worth less than $100. This was a Colt .32 caliber handgun. He was fined $50 with an extra $100 in court costs. In 1987, David was arrested during a Detroit house raid, and this caused him to spend a night in jail. David was charged with the possession of hard drugs, which was cocaine, with the purpose of distributing less than 20 grams of the cocaine. He was later released after he posted a $1,500 bond. He was also found not guilty of possession, but guilty of using the drug. This caused him to be sentenced to 2 years of probation, alongside 50 days of community service. By 1989, he was ordered to seek help from a drug rehabilitation center after he violated his probation 3 times. He obeyed and completed a 28-day drug treatment program at the Ariba Casriel Institute in New York. David's abuse of drugs not only affected his career, but also did not only cause him legal cases and made him have issues in his relationships. The singer, who was married twice, was first married to Sandra Barnes in 1961, and this marriage birthed 3 daughters, Cheryl, Nedra, and Kimberly. Of all his daughters, Cheryl was the only one who voiced out after the death of their father. The singer also has a son with Jenna Sapia. The duo met each other in 1964. Jenna had initially named their son David E. Sapia, taking out David's last name, but this didn't sit well with David as he later changed the name of his son to David Eli Ruffin Jr. The 3 of them lived together for years up until 1976, when David moved on and married Joy Hamilton. Although David and Jenna were not married, Jenna would add Ruffin, which was David's last name, to her last name. She did this as a tribute to their relationship and also because of the son they had together. In 2003, Jenna Sapia Ruffin published a memoir, which she named David Ruffin My Temptation. One would think that this memoir contained beautiful and lovely things. Perhaps the beautiful part of the life they both shared when David was still alive, but the contents were rather shocking. This memoir contained the details of David Ruffin's infidelity and abusive behavior. An interesting fact is that some of what was written about David's infidelity and abusive side can be confirmed in the relationship he shared with Tammy Terrell. Their relationship was a very loud one, and maybe this was the reason why David surprised her with a marriage proposal. If only she knew he was still married at the time of the proposal, she would have saved herself the embarrassment. Tammy found out about David's existing marriage after she announced their engagement, and this was one of the reasons why David became violent and abusive to her. By this time, D. David's abuse of hard drugs was at its peak, and he couldn't control the after effects, and Tammy had to suffer for it. Tammy endured David's violence up until David hit her in the head with his motorcycle helmet in 1967.